John Walker may not be Captain America anymore, and maybe during his short tenure this doesn't necessarily apply to him until the end, but especially afterwards, he's undeniably been America's perfect Captain America, being the actual embodiment of American ideals, which is an ugly truth to look at in the mirror and a pill to swallow that may go down easy depending on how observant you are. And in this video, I want to dissect that idea as well as the character of John Walker, from a commendable soldier to the failed state-sponsored Captain America to the new Avengers US agent, as well as the original sacred text that he hails from. Welcome to Sandwich Reviews. I'm the Talking Sentient Sandwich, your nihilistic optimist, and I'm going to try and stop myself from just repeating it over and over again, but I just love the idea that Walker is the ugly truth of American philosophy. Whether it be his arrogance in believing he still deals out true justice, his utter gluttony of sanctimony, his simultaneous self-loathing and self-importance perpetually feeding into each other in an infinite feedback loop, or his ignorance in denying everything I just listed, he just reminds me, in some ways, of the worst people in the news right now. Except this guy is redeemable. But John Walker himself, who when we were first introduced to him, at the end of the day, or at least what it seemed like, was a good man. I have no proof of this because he genuinely comes off as a guy attempting to shoulder this impossible mantle, but I can't help but feel Walker had always been prone to an emotional outburst or two, getting heated in the moment and making mistakes, only they weren't life-threatening until he took the serum. Before then, he was the epitome of a good soldier, doing what he believed was right, or rather, what he was taught was right, because like everyone, he's only a product of his upbringing, which I can't really say much about since not much is expressly told, but from what I can gather, he likely comes from a stable but not entirely wholesome or healthy family, filled with unconditional love, but not any genuine communication of the wants and needs deeper under the surface, filling the expectation of what a family should be more than becoming a cohesive unit that helps one another. And you can see John almost letting that cycle continue just from the small scene in Thunderbolts, showing that he saw taking care of his son as more of a chore. And that's only one isolated incident, yet that loveless, absent-minded fatherly obligation must have happened frequently enough for his wife Olivia to take their child and leave, which seems harsh, but looked to be the only way that John was going to wake up and realize the damage done. Of course, comic John Walker is slightly different, the biggest difference being that he looked up to his brother most, but I'll just put a pin in that for now because we're not there yet. Instead, let's just think back to simpler times, of sitting in history class and having your eyes glaze over as you slowly fall asleep to the dulcet tones of dullness. Because for me, learning about different systems and ideologies of governments sounds all kinds of boring. Unless, that is, you start relating it to superheroes. Then at least I'm in. But that includes a lot of what America runs on, which is by definition more of a constitutional democratic republic, though I guess we're gonna see how long that lasts. Not scared at all by that. But what I really want to take a look at is our obsession with capitalism, which doesn't just condone profiting in the face of harming others, but encourages it. And that's an extreme illustration of what the worst of the worst capitalists do, yet not everyone is like that. Unfortunately though, it is a great way to summarize a lot of John Walker's faults. Sometimes I think this phrase works better or worse depending on the day and whatever small peripheral details affect my thinking, but war has always been seen as the ultimate form of capitalism for me, it being the ultimate game of competition, with its currency being death. And even in wartime, before he ever got the job as Captain America or ruined his life by taking the serum, all John wanted to do was fight the good fight. Yet the distinction that needs to be made is that to him, fighting the good fight was, and still is, very different than your typical do-gooder's definition, because what he wants is to beat the bad guy. Of course, Walker is proven to at least be redeemable at the end of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, when he chooses to save people over getting the villain. Kinda contradicting my point, but he's not a complete monster. Of course he's not going to let someone die. Nonetheless, as Steve puts it, making the sacrifice play to lay down on the wire and let the other guy crawl over you is not something I'm sure Walker is capable of. I guess it probably depends on who's spectating, which is a vain way of putting it, but I genuinely believe John Walker is one of those heroes that is much more heroic if there's someone watching him to boost his fragile ego. And hand in hand with that is quite possibly his biggest flaw, or at least what ends up causing him to make mistake after mistake, that being his tendency to fall into an emotional outburst. Something I've already mentioned, but needs to be stressed considering it's gotten him in some awfully hot water. Despite the family man exterior he was introduced with, which does help to make him instantly more trusting, he doesn't quite have that healthy, all-American fatherly or brotherly vibe that he was wanting to give off. And whenever his failure to do so was shoved right back into his face, that brought him closer to another outburst as he shoved that hatred deeper down in an attempt to become a Steve Rogers-esque icon of kindness, with that fake-it-till-you-make-it kind of mindset, but the willpower necessary to keep that going just wasn't in the cards for Walker. So whether you're a knowledgeable comic fan who knew where the story was going, or just an observant watcher of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, it was obvious Walker's reckoning was coming, something catalyzed when he took the serum. And to take a small serum detour, I want to briefly talk about the MCU's super soldiers, because I've always equated every version of their serum to be as if someone were drunk and stupid, acting on small impulses that would otherwise be ignored. Zemo puts it best, but Steve's 100% morally good interior was only increased, whereas just about any other person would succumb to the inevitable corruption behind being a super soldier. Would Sam? Honestly, I don't think so, and that's why he is the best person to be Cap after Steve. Sorry if any bigot was hoping that I'd back the ridiculous statement that Sam isn't Cap. He is. And if a black man being Captain America bothers you, well, you clearly got a lot of things to deal with before worrying about what's going on in a fictional universe. But moving back a bit, before I went on that little detoured rant, though it had to be said, not every super soldier has necessarily followed that rule of becoming the most extreme and even dangerous version of their deepest self. Because we also have Bucky and Alexei, but I think that theory on super soldiers still holds up with them. A, because that's what the MCU itself has told us, but B, because if you look at Bucky and Alexei, their personalities only validate that more. Bucky is a loner and Alexei is a goofball, which could be explained by writers putting those characters into cliched boxes, but I think it's deeper than that, especially when I can pick and choose the best written scenes with them to dissect. For Bucky, I'll always go back to these scenes in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which perfectly encapsulate the lost and alone feeling perpetually eating away at him, and that prison is something he willingly puts himself into, thanks to the regret of all the people he vividly remembers assassinating. Throughout the show, with his cameo in Brave New World, and of course with him in the Thunderbolts, he's shown to be working on that, more so with his trusted friends, but more with every subsequent appearance. And then there's Alexei, and when all is said and done, he is a great father. Sometimes. Able to be serious and a guiding force to his daughters on rare occasion, especially for Yelena. However, 99% of the time, he's played as the comedy relief. And that worked well in the Thunderbolts because he essentially filled the Drax role. But when it comes to the serum Walker took and the power he received, there is a difference in him and all of the other super soldiers, which could just be in my interpretation of his abilities, but I believe he is the strongest out of the bunch. Significantly. And there's no proof behind that, but it did take both Bucky and Sam working together to defeat him. Plus, there's this jump he did in the Thunderbolts. Apologies for the crappy footage, that's all I could find. But maybe there is some canon explanation that Wilfred Nagel's new serum was considerably stronger. I remember him talking about it being his sleeker version since it didn't make you all buff, which sounds like kind of a missed opportunity if you ask me. Yet, I bet I just missed the explanation on the serum. But getting back to Walker as a character, who at times can be both loner and goofball, but is mostly just a dick. which sounds like an indictment of his character, but is the very reason why I find him so compelling. As mentioned before, he isn't a complete monster, but still isn't quite redeemable. So whenever he pops up again, I'm not exactly rooting for him. I'm enjoying the performance and finding plenty of amusement in the situations he puts himself in, but against a lot of Marvel's other characters introduced post-Endgame, Walker is far from my favorite. Nonetheless, thanks to him being such a compelling character, I'm excited to see him moving forward. Yet, none of that would be possible without the OG to base this all off of, who I guess I should have talked about at the very start of the video, chronologically speaking, but I wanted to talk about the MCU version. But this guy is somewhat different. To be fair, only being slightly more morally good in the MCU, but that little bit has done wonders for his popularity. Of course, he first appeared in 1968's Captain America number 323, written by Mark Gruenwald, who introduced John Walker with another American-inspired moniker, Super Patriot, and was also introduced with a whole team of sidekicks literally named the Buckies, which included Battlestar, plus 2 more named Left Winger and Right Winger. It wasn't too much longer until Steve Rogers retired and for the mantle of Cap to be of contention, but by issue number 333, Walker had fully stepped into the role. But that would last even shorter than his movie counterpart, since it was only 4 issues later that he was stripped of the suit and instead wore the US agent costume. Sometimes he'd make another brief return as the government-backed Captain America, but was always the other Cap. And along with some team-ups with the West Coast Avengers, and particularly with his first solo series in 1993, he'd become an influential character in terms of allowing writers to shine a light on what doesn't work in American ideals. Where Steve can be used to show the best of what the US has to offer, John shows us the pitiful and sadly dangerous reality hiding beneath the surface. But to wrap it up, I want to summarize US Agent best all the way from comics to movies, because the greatest way to summarize John Walker's character is the designation jingoistic, a word I did not know about before doing research for this video, but found and immediately knew had to be included. Because, if you weren't aware, jingoistic is defined as a derogatory term used to characterize extreme patriotism, especially in the form of aggressive or warlike foreign policy. And if you walk away from this video thinking one thing, it's that America as a whole is jingoistic more and more every day. And if we don't all want to end up a dumb failure like US Agent, then maybe we should take the time to look in the mirror. I know that's mean to Walker, and he isn't nearly as bad as some of the vilest of Americans who boil my blood with just the thought of, but I figured, like Walker, a shock to the system with that ugly truth is probably the only thing capable of waking us up from the ethical rock bottom we're currently facing. But with that existential crisis out of the way, and not knowing how long we truly have, I want you to internalize this, because I genuinely mean it every time I say, thank you for watching. It means so much when you support the channel and watch a video of mine, but if you're up for it, leaving a like or subscribing for more weekly video essays and reviews does wonders for letting the YouTube gods know my channel is something you like. But even without that, one thing that's non-negotiable now that you've seen this video is that you enjoy a delicious sandwich.